As a reminder, something that we say with all of our legal webinars, this presentation is intended for legal information only. It can't be relied on as legal advice, and the information is accurate at the time of broadcasting, but it may change if you're watching the recording at a later date. So we've still got a lot of people coming in, but I will formally begin the webinar today. So welcome to this webinar on Work and Development Orders, the 2025 Guidelines and Resource Kit. I'm joining today from Gadigal land, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. As we come together today for the purpose of legal education, may we also acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first educators, storytellers, and lawmakers across the lands that we're all joining from. So I'll now introduce the speakers and the people working behind the scenes on this webinar. So some will be speaking, some will be asking questions in the background. Laura Buetti, Jessica Brown, and Elizabeth Brown from Legal Aid New South Wales. We have Kellyanne Summerlad from Revenue New South Wales, and we have Linda Mines from DCJ. So really, really excited for some of these changes that you're about to hear, and I'll pass it on to Laura to give an outline of what we'll be speaking about in the webinar. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks so much, Yasmin. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name's Laura. I'm from the WDO service at Legal Aid. I'm working on a Wabakal country today, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. We know that the fine system has a disproportionate impact on First Nations people, so I would like to acknowledge that as well. Always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So outline of today's session, we're going to talk a little bit about the background to these changes and why we needed them. We'll go through an outline of those key changes one by one, and there's 8 of them to go through. We'll have a run through from DCJ of what sits in the new resource kits, fact sheets and forms. Revenue New South Wales will talk to some of the updates to the Revenue self-service portal. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the resources and support available to you if you have questions come up while navigating the new guidelines. So I'll hand it over to Linda from DCJ to talk to the background and the rationale behind some of the changes. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you, Laura, and hi, everyone. So great to see so many of you here today. I'm working at DCJ at the moment, and we are the Secretariat for the WDO Governance Group, which is an overarching kind of group, including Revenue, Legal Aid, DCJ, and ALS, which looks at the policy settings of the WDO guidelines. And DCJ are responsible, the Attorney General is responsible ultimately for signing off on the guidelines. So we have been primarily responsible for pulling it together in consultation with our partners. I just wanted to give a bit of a background. Obviously, the last guidelines were 2017. So the WDO scheme partners have had many conversations. There's actually been a few different versions of the guidelines that have been up before the, that we've attempted to get through, but for various reasons, anyone who works in government will know that, these things can work slowly, but we're very proud of the guidelines as they've turned out, which, is probably a result of just the time and the thinking that it's taken to put into them. In the 8 years since the last guidelines, there have been in the background some legislative changes to the Fines Act. So there was a change to add social workers as a new category of sponsor. There was a change confirming that you can do a WDO for New South Wales fines if you live in other states or territories, and also if you're a sponsor in other states. And we removed the 25-year age limit on mentoring. So those are all changes in the Fines Act that, of course, we had to bring across to the WDO guidelines. There was also a big audit that was conducted by Department of Justice, as it was then back in 2018. And that was a really comprehensive audit of the WDO scheme and raised a number of issues and problems, and really had 37 recommendations to improve kind of operations and the policy settings of the WDO scheme. So we've been trying to work through those over the past 7 to 8 years. And a lot of those changes that arose from that audit have been included in the guidelines, and the big ones are the privacy and consent obligations, clarifying assessment procedures, and a few other forms that we'll go through later. The other big thing that there was a lot of thinking about this, and we had contact from the drug court very early on after the 2017 guidelines were issued, because they said that drug court could not be included on a WDO. So there's been a lot of discussion around which activities can be included, which are excluded, which are permitted. And so we've really simplified that by saying that if it's an activity, it can be included. But Laura will give you more information about that. And the other thing is, as it's turned out, we now have this sort of it's a double-barreled guidelines. We've raised up the high-level policy operational settings of the guidelines into the guidelines document. And I think it's been clarified and simplified. It's in 4 sections. And then we've put a lot of the detail and support into the resource kit, which is all the fact sheets and forms. So that will really enable us to, over time, make additional changes, things like updating the income table, so we're not going to be so out of date as we have been with the 2017 guidelines. So yeah, that's just a bit of an overview about the changes to the guidelines. So back to you, Laura. Thanks.
Thanks, Linda. Okay, so we'll go through the 8 key changes to the WDO guidelines, some of which Linda's already touched on, but we'll go through in detail so that we're clear about what the 8 changes are. So we'll go to the next slide. So the first one is a very practical change. It's a new structure to how the guidelines look. So as Linda mentioned, the guidelines have been separated out into 2 very user-friendly, interactive and fillable documents. The first of those is a set of high-level guidelines with the overarching policy and boundaries of the scheme. And to support that is a resource kit that sits alongside the guidelines. And that's really for sponsors and WDO participants to provide detailed and specific guidance on the day-to-day administration of the scheme. So the guidelines are made up of 4 parts, and that's an overview of the scheme, information for sponsors, how to manage a WDO, and then a section on investigations, audits, and approvals. Plus then, of course, the resource kit that sits alongside that. We'll move on to change number 2. So the key change number 2 is that social workers can now be approved as sponsors in their own right. So although social workers previously could be approved as sponsors under the for-profit category, the process for social workers who wanted to independently become a WDO sponsor was quite unclear. So under the new guidelines, a person who's a qualified social worker now has 2 ways to apply and be approved as a WDO sponsor in their own right. So that's either a generalist social worker who's eligible for membership of the Australian Association of Social Workers, so the AASW. They may be approved to support all WDO activities aside from medical and mental health treatment. You can also, as a social worker, get registered as a WDO sponsor if you are a member of the AASW as an accredited mental health social worker. You may also be approved then to undertake any WDO activity, including providing mental health treatment. So you'll see on the screen there that there's fact sheet 2.5. So that's inside the resource kit, and it provides information about the application process for social workers specifically, noting the different documentation that will be required depending on whether you're applying as a generalist social worker or as a mental health accredited social worker. We can keep going on to the next one. So change number 3, and again, Linda briefly touched on this as a change to the Fines Act. So the interstate operability of the WDO scheme has been clarified within the guidelines now to reflect those changes in the Fines Act. So what that really means in practice is that a sponsor may be located in any other Australian state or territory that's not New South Wales, and that a person who has the fines debt, and that's New South Wales fines debt, may be living in another Australian state or territory at the time that they're undertaking their WDO, so long as it's in respect of a New South Wales fine. Move on to key change number 4. So this is the expansion of mentoring as an activity and the removal of the age restriction, which was 25 years of age. So we're all really excited about this this change because it's opened up a whole new level of opportunity for people to engage in mentoring as an activity. So I thought it might be useful just to speak to the definition that's under the guidelines now. So mentoring is a semi-formal structured relationship between a more experienced and less experienced person, which is open now to all people. Mentoring may contribute to general well-being, reduce isolation, and develop connection with society, develops living skills, improve employment prospects, or promote connection with culture and healing. A mentoring relationship focuses on the needs of the mentee and is structured in a way that encourages progress towards the achievement of milestones and goals. Mentoring is used to assist individuals at specific stages of development or transition and lasts for a sustained but defined period of time. So it's quite it's a big definition, but the idea is to broaden and expand this activity in a way that more people can access it. I think some of the key things to take away if you're a sponsor and you're considering whether you can offer mentoring as an activity, I think some of the key things to take away from the definition are about whether you're supporting your participants with achieving particular milestones or goals at specific stages of the transition for them to be achieving those goals, and whether it's a structured relationship between someone who is more experienced supporting the mentee who is less experienced in reaching that particular goal. So there's some of the things to think about when you're thinking about whether perhaps an activity that you've offered historically as case management or counselling may now fit under this new definition of mentoring, especially now that it's open to people of all age. So just some examples, mentoring can include programs for people who are transitioning from prison, refugee support, or Aboriginal culture and healing programs. So just, I guess this is a really big plug for sponsors to be thinking about how you might be able to now offer this as an activity. It is a compliance-based activity, which means that participants are able to reduce their fines by up to $1,000 a month for full compliance. So it's quite significant and could be a really meaningful activity to offer for participants if you as an organisation or an individual are able to offer this to your WDO participants. We'll move on to the next key change, number 5. Again, one of the most significant and exciting changes to the guidelines has been the change to allow WDO activities which are mandated by either a court or some other purpose, that they can now be included on a WDO. So in practice, what that means is that the fact that an activity is also required for some other reason does not preclude it from being counted towards your WDO or your participants' WDO. So the examples are up there on the screen, but some of them, some activities that may legitimately now be included in a WDO include activities ordered by the court, including the drug court, activities undertaken while in jail, juvenile detention, or under a community corrections order, activities undertaken as part of a person's mutual obligations for Centrelink, participation in activities under reasonable directions as part of a parole order, community correction order, conditional release order, or intensive correction order, educational activities during normal school hours for compulsory school-aged children. So this amendment will enable those schools who want to incentivise normal school attendance to be able to include those activities for participants without seeking a special exemption. and educational activities that are undertaken for the purpose of a traineeship or an apprenticeship. So I'm seeing all the love hearts and the thumbs up, and yes, we feel the same way. It's very exciting to have this clarity for our sponsors and participants, and also just the fact that it's a real expansion of the scheme in terms of people who are already engaged in activities for particular reasons, that can also be supporting them to reduce their fines debt. So yes, this is a great change. Fact sheet 3.3, which isn't up on the screen, but fact sheet 3.3 in the resource kit has much more detailed information about these changes as well. Moving on to key change number 6. So the updated guidelines now provide a clear 3-step process to determining eligibility, participants' eligibility under the scheme. So a person is eligible for a WDO if they satisfy all of the following, and we'll go through each one in detail. So the first is that the participant needs to meet at least one of the grounds of eligibility as set out in Form 3 of the client eligibility checklist, which you'll find in the resource kit. And we'll have a look at that a bit later. But when I'm talking about an applicant's eligibility, that can include one of the following. So that's if you have a participant who's experiencing acute economic hardship, they are experiencing homelessness, they have a mental illness, intellectual disability or cognitive impairment, or a serious addiction to alcohol or other volatile substances. So once you've determined that the participant or the person that you're working with meets one of those grounds of eligibility, you'll then move on to determine whether they meet the ground of experiencing hardship. So a person may be experiencing hardship if they have a low income or limited access to income, including difficulty paying bills and repayments on loans and debts when they are due, or they cannot afford or must go without basic items or services, or they lack capacity, opportunity, or choices to improve their situation, or they are experiencing difficulty in participating in economic, social, or cultural activities. So more information about both 1 and 2 are found in the resource kit. So when you're sitting down with a potential WDO participant and you're considering their eligibility to the scheme, you can look at the client eligibility checklist and go through that with them, or they can fill it out themselves to determine whether they fit into the first 2 of those eligibility criterias. There's also information there about what evidence is required to support the ground of eligibility that you're seeking to make the application on. The third step is that you have to be satisfied as a sponsor that the WDO applicant that you are supporting does not possess substantial assets. So within the resource kit, there is an applicant declaration available, and sponsors will need to now ask WDO applicants to sign that declaration when they're going through the documents at the start of the process. So the declaration says, I declare that I do not possess or have access to any substantial assets. This means that aside from the home that I live in, I do not own, co-own, or have access to additional investment properties, any luxury or prestige motor vehicles or boats, investments or savings or other liquid assets. I understand that Revenue New South Wales holds information about land tax assessments and may undertake data matching or public searches with land registry services or other agencies to identify possible sources of income or substantial assets that may impact my eligibility for a WDO. So in terms of, your obligations and your reporting requirements for assessing eligibility for WDO participants, for number 3 in the 3-step process, the obligation is to get the applicant to sign the declaration about their substantial assets. You don't need to do any further digging. It is simply getting that declaration signed, and that declaration alerts the participant that Revenue might undertake further searches to confirm that they do not possess substantial assets. Okay, we'll move on to key change number 7. So key change number 7 is the clarification of acute economic hardship for young people. So historically, the scheme had allowed for sponsors to nominate a client's eligibility as acute economic hardship if they had been a young person up to the age of 18 years. Again, excitingly, this has now been expanded to include young people between the age of 18 and 25 years of age who have been under the care of youth justice or in out-of-home care with Communities and Justice or an accredited agency. So if you are wanting to support a young person who's been in out-of-home care and they are between 18 and 25, you'll need to provide evidence confirming the applicant's age. So whether that's a birth certificate or an ID card that has a date of birth on it, as well as some evidence, so a letter, for example, from a relevant agency confirming that that person has been in out-of-home care or has exited out-of-home care. So again, that's an exciting expansion for the scheme, and hopefully will capture a very vulnerable cohort to be able to more easily access the WDO scheme without having to provide any further financial documentation, etc., and make the process easier for sponsors who are working with young people. So the last key change is a big one, and it relates to sponsor privacy and consent obligations. And we're hoping that the changes have clarified those obligations for sponsors. So as I'm sure many of you know, there are legal obligations when we as public sector organisations, health organisations, allied health organisations, non-government organisations, whoever we are, that we must abide by when we are collecting, storing, using or disclosing personal, sensitive and or health information for the people that we're working with. So the new guidelines at section 3.1 set out in detail your obligations as a sponsor in relation to privacy and consent. So, and we've also created some resources to support that obligation. So prior to collecting any information or submitting a WDO application, sponsors must now provide the applicant with a copy of the privacy collection notice and an FAQ document that we've created and is available in the resource kit. We'll just move on to the next slide that talks to consent obligations, because that ties into what I'm just talking about in key change number 8. But this document here is the consent form that you'll find in the resource kit. It's now an obligation on a sponsor to have that consent form signed by the WDO participant. Once it's signed, the consent starts from that date and that consent remains in force for the duration of the WDO or until the consent is withdrawn. I'm now going to pass over to Linda again to talk to some of the resources available in the resource kit. Thanks, Linda.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Yasmin. So that's the overview of the resource kit. One of the great things I love about this package is that it's interactive. So there's a tab at the top and you can connect from the guidelines across to the resource kit. So you can easily flip backwards and forwards. The fact sheets and forms in the resource kit also align to the parts of the guidelines. So the first part is 2 fact sheets, which are kind of general. The first one's a general overview of the fine system and puts a bit of context about how WDOs fit with the other fine mitigation options in the New South Wales fine system. And the second one is general information, which you might give to somebody when they're like, well, why should I be a WDO sponsor? So it's got some good news stories, a bit of an overview about why an organisation might want to be a WDO sponsor. Part 2 is set out as information for sponsors. So the first fact sheet 2.1 to 2.5 are all specific fact sheets to help all the different types of sponsor organisations become approved. It's really like a step-by-step guide and helping you to know what insurance documents you need to upload, what qualifications you need. So it's very detailed information about how to become a sponsor. Fact sheet 2.6 and 2.7 are called WO sponsor summaries. They really are the documents that Revenue New South Wales will use when a new sponsor gets approved, or if you were to do a variation of the activities, Revenue New South Wales will send out a copy of one of these documents, and it sets out exactly what you're approved for. So they're quite handy for you. They are fillable. So you can actually, if you had a new user starting, you could give them a copy of this form and say, these are the activities that we do. This is who we are. This is our sponsor ID. So that's a kind of summary document that you can use for your organisation. Fact sheet 2.8 is sponsor obligations. So we tried to pull together into one place all of the overarching sponsor obligations. So, you know, your record keeping requirements, your referring to your privacy obligations, how to enter a WO. So it's kind of a useful fact sheet. I think it's got just a list of all the different sponsor obligations. It also brings in some of the main obligations for the self-service portal. So, and for administrators, you know, so it's really a one-stop shop looking at all sponsor obligations. And fact sheet 2.9 gives a lot of detail, a lot more detail about conflict of interest, because that seems to be, it's an issue that a number of sponsors struggle with. You know, when do I declare a conflict of interest? Can I do a WO if this person works at our organisation? What do I need to do? How do I manage it? So we're hoping that fact sheet will help you to have more confidence about when you should declare a conflict of interest, and that you can declare a conflict of interest and continue to manage it. It means that you're just telling Revenue, hey, yes, there's something that may be perceived to be a conflict of interest in this matter. So Revenue can look at it and just make sure that everything's in order, that the person really is eligible, that you're keeping the adequate records. So that's got some interesting information in it. Part 3, managing a WO, is really all setting out about the steps to apply for a WO and to report on a WO. So we broke it into 2 sections, the fact sheets and the forms. The fact sheets are not intended to be fillable. So we've got fact sheet 3.1, which gives a whole lot of information about WO activities. Fact sheet 3.2 is a step-by-step guide. This is really just, you know, you could print this out and give this to a new user on the portal, perhaps. It really just sets out what you have to do, how you enter a WO, how you have to report, what your obligations are. Fact sheet 3.3 is giving some more information, particularly about the monthly compliance agreements. So that $1,000 a month for mental health treatment, drug and alcohol treatment, and mentoring, and how you can report on that. And it's introducing an idea. This arose in the audit that I mentioned previously, and it's introducing an idea that an activity doesn't necessarily have to be an hour of activity. It's an activity unit. So have a look at that. There's some information about that, and Kellyanne will give you some information about the portal that aligns to that slight change in information as well. Then we've got part B, which is the forms. So that the privacy collection notice and the privacy FAQ and consent form. Yeah, they're pretty self-explanatory. The privacy collection notice just really gives a lot of information about what the obligations are, what your obligations are, what's happening to information. So that's intended to be an information sheet that you would give to a person who's you're supporting to do a WO. Then we have the client eligibility checklist, and Laura mentioned this. So that's really intended for the client to fill out to say, so they're being asked the 3 questions and they have to assert that they satisfy those 3 criteria. Then Form 4 is a client intake form. This really mirrors the information that you need to give on the WDO self-service portal. I imagine this might be handy for people if you didn't have internet access, if you were seeing a client somewhere and you might want to just take all the important information, you could print that form out and know that you're collecting all the information that you're going to need when you go back to the office and enter the WDO into the portal. And then the last one is a WDO activity timesheet, which is meant to be a help for you. It could be useful if you're referring a client on a WDO to another organisation. So you could get the client to take that timesheet with them, get the other provider to fill out the activities that they're doing, and then send it back to you. So it's meant to help you with those reporting requirements. Yeah, and to make sure you're capturing the right information that you can then enter into the portal. And I should note that you are potentially subject to audit, or Revenue does internal reviews just to make sure that people are compliant with the rules of the WDO scheme. So if you are asked to partake in one of those audits or reviews, these fact sheets are intended to really help you to have the right information that you can provide. So that's it. Thanks, Laura. I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Linda. That's great. I think we're going to go straight to Kellyanne, actually, to talk us through the self-service portal changes.
Thanks, Laura. So first up, we'll have a quick look at the application form to become a new WDO sponsor. It has been updated to include social workers as an additional category. It includes a definition of a social worker for the purposes of a WDO, including that distinction between a general social worker and an accredited mental health social worker. And when applying to become a sponsor, a social worker will need to choose whether they are registering as a general social worker or an accredited mental health social worker. And if they are a general social worker, they'll need to confirm if they're registered with the Australian Association of Social Workers. And if not, they need to attach evidence of their qualifications to the application. Recognising that most of you on the webinar today are already registered as WDO sponsors with us, but just as an FYI, if you do know of a social worker who could be interested in joining the scheme. Next slide, please. So as for the portal changes, which will affect you all more than the new application form, there's been a number of front-facing and back-end changes within the portal. Most notably, the restriction on mentoring as an activity has been removed. So as Laura mentioned, previously mentoring was only available to customers under 25, and there was validation on a customer's date of birth within the portal to make sure that only the correct people were getting access to that activity. That's now gone. As has the validation on a customer's address to allow interstate accessibility. So previously, if you entered a postcode for any state other than New South Wales, it flagged up and wouldn't let you progress any further for an application. That's no longer an issue. The main applicant-facing changes to the portal, though, are shown here. The first is an update to the estimated number of hours field that Linda spoke about not that long ago. So it now reads that there is an estimated number of hours, commitments, or activities per month to allow for activities that are more compliance-based to be included clearly in a customer application. So for example, if a customer is seeing their psychologist fortnightly and they're also required to complete a journaling activity between those sessions, this would count as an estimate of 4 for this section of the form because the customer is completing 4 activities, which would allow them to get their full compliance rate of $1,000 every month if they did those 4 things, being 2 sessions with the psychologist and 2 journaling activities. Also to support the Youth Justice and Department of Communities and Justice change for out-of-home care. When you select acute economic hardship as the grounds for a WDO and the customer's date of birth indicates they are under 25, a new validation question appears, confirming has your client ever been under the care of Youth Justice, or have they ever been in out-of-home care with the Department of Communities and Justice or an accredited agency? If you select yes to this question, then you no longer need to fill in a financial section to validate the customer's acute economic hardship status, but we can reach out at any point to ask you to just provide some proof to show that they have been in out-of-home care or under the care of Youth Justice or those other agencies. But as always, if you're unsure with any part of the customer application or there's anything in the WDO portal that you need support on, give us a call. The WDO hotline is available to give you that support at any point, and you can contact us on 1300 478 879. I'll hand back to Laura.
Thanks, Kellyanne. That's great. Okay, so just to sort of finish us off for the day, I wanted to talk to some of the resources and supports that are available to you as sponsors as you navigate the new guidelines. So we'll move to the next slide. Just a bit of a plug for our legal aid website, which has the WDO sponsor resources page on it. That's that page there on the right-hand side. It includes a copy of those guidelines, the resource kit separated out, and it's also got a copy of the Revenue New South Wales Self-Service User Guide, which is from 2018 and is due for an update. So when there's a new version, we'll also put that up there as well. We'll go to the next slide just for, wait for it to be up, there we go. So on that same page, there's a breakdown of the fact sheets and forms that we've discussed in the resource kit. So they're broken up on this page into separate PDF documents that you can download. So if you don't want to go through the resource kit and find exactly what you need, you can download them here. You can save them to your desktop, whatever you want to do. It's just another way to access those fact sheets and forms that are found within the new resource kit. Just moving on to the next slide, there's also quite a few resources there. This is just what they look like, so you become familiar with them. But I just wanted to point out that on the right-hand side, there's the WDO brochures and other publications and resources that you or your organisation can order from the Legal Aid website to promote the WDO scheme within your organisation or to give some more information to participants about what the scheme is. So you just go onto the publications link on that sponsor resource page, and you can actually order them, and Legal Aid will print them and send them to your office or wherever you are, and you can use those there. So what to do if you have questions? The team at Legal Aid, our entire role in this scheme is to support sponsors. So we provide training, support and advice to sponsors. If you've got colleagues who you think would benefit from this training, we run a monthly training as well for new sponsors or people who just want a refresher about the scheme or have very specific questions that they want answered. We run a monthly training. We also do some focus topic training on specific relevant topics like record keeping, compliance, different activities. So we run those throughout the year. In relation to these guidelines, if your team have specific questions around how the guidelines apply to you, especially around things like activities, like I was discussing with mentoring, you can contact us and we can talk through and brainstorm ideas of what kind of activities you could be offering or whether your programs fit into a particular activity. So we can be contacted wdo@legalaid.newsouthwales.gov.au. We're a statewide service, and we have people physically located around the state. And so we can put you in touch with someone who's going to, potentially even be able to see you face-to-face or come out to your organisation and provide face-to-face training. Kellyanne's already spoken about the WDO hotline at Revenue, but they're an incredible resource for sponsors and available 8:30 to 5 p.m. on the phone, Monday to Friday, except for public holidays. So if you have questions, I guess specifically in relation to the administration on the self-service portal, can't recommend enough contacting the hotline to try and resolve that issue if you're struggling or can't find the answer in the guidelines. We finished up, I think, at about 12:45, so we probably have a few minutes for questions, Yasmin. Should we, I haven't actually looked at the Q&A, but maybe we could start to try and answer some of those.
Can I just clarify, Yasmin and Laura, that we will be sending a copy of this PowerPoint out to everyone?
Yeah, so I'll likely get that out tomorrow. An email will go out from Zoom, and that will have it in there, but we'll also likely send a separate email as well with the answers to the questions. So just wait a bit of time for that. There may be 2 emails that come through.
Yeah. So I can see here there's a question about supporting a client, whether supporting a client with parenting skills and capacity can be considered as mentoring. I would say absolutely. It definitely depends on the relationship that you have with the person that you're working with and would need to fit within that specific definition that we spoke about earlier. But that kind of skill or goal is something that could be considered as mentoring for sure.
Laura, there's one here about, is there a minimum hours to complete to get the $1,000 a month for mentoring? Which is an interesting question.
Yeah, so the answer to that question, I guess, strictly is no. At the moment, the way that it's set up on the portal is that there's a recommendation for 4 hours or 4 units, which roughly equates to 4 hours of activity for someone to undertake for mentoring, for compliance-based activities, that is. So that's medical, mental health, drug or alcohol treatment or mentoring. But it is, I guess, based on the agreement that you have with the participant and what you are going to be able to reasonably do to support them in the month. And then the portal will allow you to input that and what full compliance would look like. Kellyanne, feel free to jump in and let me know if you want to add anything here. But it really is an agreement between the participant and the person offering the WDO as to what full compliance looks like. Sorry, I was just going to say there's quite a few examples in the resource kit that I'd urge you to look at. So, we've anticipated a lot of situations that might come up, or a lot of questions that might come up around this particular point. And so the resource kit has quite a few examples to sort of speak to that. But yeah, go for it, Kellyanne.
I absolutely agree with all of that, Laura. And I would definitely caution against overcommitting in those hours, because the last thing we want to see is somebody being disadvantaged because initially, they start out with 6 hours a month, for example, and then they're not able to commit, so they're not getting their full compliance rate. And just remember that if those things do change, you can actually go and update the number of commitment hours or activities within the portal. So please make sure that you do that if the client circumstances change. And again, if you need support to do that, our team can help over the phone, walk you through how to do that.
Yeah, thank you. Hope that answers that question. There's a question here about not being able to find the resources on the Legal Aid website. Very happy for a link to that to be sent around, Yasmin, maybe with the information that goes around to everybody, but it's just it's under fines. It can be a little bit confusing to find, but very happy to send a link around to the sponsor resources page. Sorry, I'm just filtering through some of these questions to see if there's any we can answer quickly. There's a question about, are these forms, e.g. the eligibility checklist, client intake form, activity sheet, mandatory to be completed in this form, or can we simply answer these questions via the portal? The activity timesheet is absolutely optional. You don't need to use that if you don't want to. You can have a different way or method of recording activities. You just must have a record of the hours that that person has engaged in the activity for the month. In terms of the eligibility checklist, yes, my understanding is that you do have to use it because that's where the consent form is also, and now I'm getting confused, and Linda, maybe you can jump in. But the eligibility checklist, the client can sign and fill in themselves, and you can also fill it in. It also has a little section for you to explain what hardship the client is experiencing. So it really goes to this idea of record keeping and compliance with the scheme. And so having a copy of that would be best practice for the purpose of an audit. For the application, though, I don't think that particular form is required. It's just the consent document that is required. Linda, jump in if you want to add anything there, or if I've missed anything.
Yeah, no, that sounds right, Laura. And just to, yeah, as you said, all of these forms really are intended to support sponsors to comply with their record keeping obligations, because, you know, this is a self-assessment scheme. You keep records and you are subject to audit or investigations. And so it's a question of you being able to supply these forms if you are audited or questioned or asked for them. So yeah, you would keep them in your records.
And if I can just add on to that as well, we've actually had a couple of questions at Revenue in relation to telehealth providers who often do not have that face-to-face opportunity to physically hand somebody a form and say, you know, can you sign this? And in those instances, if you can get an electronic signature or an electronic notification from the customer that yes, they consent to that, whether that's even you attaching that form and emailing it out to them and them emailing their consent back, that's also fine, as long as there's some sort of record that it has been supplied to the customer and that they have read and acknowledged that.
Yeah, I agree. I would even say a file note. Don't you think? Like, to say that I've read this out to the person, we file noted it the day, and then you've, you know, insert the person's name and with a attached comment saying that you've spoken to that person. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We don't want to make it overly complicated. We want to just make sure you've got some proof. I'm sorry. Oh, there was another question here about somebody wanting to add an activity, somebody seeing a social worker, and does the social worker need to be approved for the person to see that person? So I just can't find the actual question now, but the answer is no. In order to deliver WO activities, a person doesn't need to be an approved sponsor. It's only if they want to be an approved sponsor and also enter the WO activities on the portal, if that's clear. Social workers can provide activities that another sponsor is entering as a WO. Is that right, Kellyanne?
Yep. So if you're approved to refer your customers out and you refer them out to a social worker, that social worker does not need to be registered, but you are responsible for reporting that the customer has met their whatever obligations that you've agreed on with them or the social worker.
There's also a question here about if a client has fines in Queensland but lives in New South Wales, can they work them off through the WDO in New South Wales? The answer is no if those fines are Queensland fines. So if they are New South Wales fines, but the person is living in Queensland, they can absolutely work them off on a WDO under the New South Wales scheme. and when I say no, that's me not knowing what the Queensland scheme might look like. So there is a WDO equivalent, or I think it's called SPUR in Queensland, and they may have scope, or they may have a similar system in place for interstate operability. But I'm not sure about that. So the New South Wales scheme only relates to New South Wales fines debt.
There's a question here as well. Can a counsellor who's not a social worker or a psychologist become a sponsor? Which is a good question. At the moment, they can become approved. If you are a counsellor or you're some kind of health provider and you are a sole trader, you have a practice with insurance, you can get approved as a for-profit organisation. So have a look at that application form. But you can't get approved as a health practitioner or a social worker. Or you might be a for-profit organisation, or if you come under some other organisation, government or NGO as well. Anthony Jenkins asked about a client scheduled in a mental health ward and undergoing medication monitoring changes. It's actually a good question. Yes, it can be counted. Compulsory mental health treatment can be counted. I actually noticed that section from the old guidelines has somehow dropped out from the new resource kit. So it's something we're going to have to make sure we add back in, because absolutely compulsory mental health treatment is allowed to be counted as mental health treatment.
Yeah, thanks, Linda.
Kellyanne, what about this question here saying she's a social worker who's approved as a for-profit organisation? Should they change sponsor types to a social worker?
So, Linda, that's the question that we've posed for the governance group to make a decision on. But for now, as a registered for-profit organisation, I wouldn't do anything until you hear from us. And it will likely transition, if it does transition, around your renewal date. So there won't need to be anything that you do for now. And if we do need to do that, we will manage all of that in the back end for you.
I think maybe the remaining questions we might answer in the FAQs. Yasmin?
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining. These are really exciting changes, and I'm sure that, we'll be excited to hear more about it as well and see how they go. If you are interested in joining other webinars about the WDO program or other webinars, we have a Law for Community Workers webinar series. You'll receive a link as well tomorrow with information about how you can sign up to get those alerts delivered straight to your inbox. And I do want to really thank Laura, Kellyanne, and Linda today for doing two great sessions about these guidelines, and to Jessica, Elizabeth, and Natalie in the background as well, supporting this webinar. So a huge thanks to them. We will, as I said, be sending out all the links to the resources tomorrow. And if you are watching this webinar on YouTube as a recorded webinar, we'll put all the information in the description for the video as well, so you don't miss out. So thanks, everyone. And if you do have a couple of questions that you do want to ask, we'll make sure that we add it to the list. So have a good day, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.